Let's go ahead and get started. I know we'll have others that'll be joining us within the next couple minutes. My name is Kimberly Miller, and I'm with the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals. And we appreciate you all being with us today, and I think this will be a very insightful webinar. And on that note, it's entitled Benchmarking Alliance Performance Through Objective Data Metrics. And I'm very honored to welcome two gentlemen who represent one of ASAP's new partnerships, Patrick Heffernan and Jeff Wallicott. The foundation of our partnership with Technology Business Research is to help ASAP members access competitive intelligent tools that support strategic decision makers. Benchmarking in alliance performance, particularly in the technology sector, requires disruption, and legacy partner programs and metrics are misaligned to the way end customers seek to procure technology solutions. And Patrick and Jeff have a great program planned. I'm going to let them describe a little bit more about not only themselves, but also what they're going to share. But I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. Patrick and Jeff, thank you very much. And
Excellent. Thank you, Kim. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today, benchmarking alliance performance through objective data metrics. So just so you can see if my forwarding of the slides will work. There we go. So I'm Patrick Heffernan. I run the professional services and IT services and digital transformation practice here at Technology Business Research, and I'm joined by my colleague Jeff. My background, I've been here about 9 years. Before that, I was with Deloitte. Before that, I had a completely different career in government. Jeff has been in the technology space for forever, and there's two really important things about that. One, that means there's nothing about the technology space, particularly the business models around technology, that surprises him. And then two, if it does surprise him, he gets passionate about it because he really cares about it because it's something new. So he's our go-to guy for really putting context around what matters, what's changing. My practice looks at the day-to-day or the quarter-by-quarter operations and business models of about 60 IT services vendors and management consultancies and some federally focused businesses. And Jeff is our guy at TBR that can look at everything all the time. You can see on the right who it is, who TBR is, what we do. What we're going to cover today, we're going to look at our framework for alliances. And then we're going to talk about some of the market forces and the competitive forces and the technology forces that are pressuring that framework around alliances. We're going to talk about ecosystem challenges and solutions. We're going to give some examples of our research into this particular area. And then we'll finish with some what we think are the critical questions to be asking about alliance structures right now, and then the critical sort of success factors for, I guess, answering those questions. Right?
Monitoring, yeah.
So with that, I will turn it over to Jeff to get us rolling.
Okay, so what you see up here, I'm not going to necessarily drain it specifically, but this is the framework model. So we'll just talk real quickly, ecosystem value chain. Those are all the different sort of piece parts and components of tech, the what that we assemble, including, and you'll notice at the very top of that one on ecosystem, we have in there included the end users because customers are innovating as much, and there are some joint ventures for shared intellectual property. So that's just, from straight components all the way up into the professional IT services, cloud and software. Industries are relatively self-explanatory. You could make that as deep or as narrow as you want. As the need is to get more and more into solving the business problem, there is need to sort of click one level down or two levels down within that for that true sort of niche IP that solves a business problem. Now, the front piece of this, the business value chain, that's where all the problems or challenges are in the current constructs, because they've largely been driven by whomever the anchor vendor was in the ecosystem. They could dictate the terms. Now, in our most recent piece of research, those players that are on the right-hand side, that is where we were evaluating the intersections of how many dedicated resources does Accenture, I'm just pulling off the top of the list, how many dedicated resources does Accenture have focus specifically either with Microsoft, Amazon, or Google. What percentage of the revenue are they getting out of this? What are the kind of key industries, if there are any, that are there to be addressed on that? So that is the construct, and it's easy to do when looking at what I'll call big to big alliances.
Right. I think it's important to understand this is how we look at the world. And when we're going to come back to this particular set of vendors here when we talk about some of our specific research, and you see 10 companies there, as I mentioned, we cover about 60, and we're also it's quarterly coverage, so it's relentless. Every single time one of these companies releases their earnings, we're trying to understand what's new, what's different, how do they perform, what's a change in their strategy, and what can we expect in the near term out of these companies. Some of you may pick up on the fact that Deloitte's on this list. They don't report their quarterly earnings. I wish they did, but we'll come back to them later.
So when we say things are changing, right, it's becoming out of step. What would happen with that business value chain is there would be these specific labels of the treatment, the different terms and conditions, the discrete commercial offers, and never the twain would meet necessarily across these. We have 7 different labeled there, from the system integrator down to the transaction reseller. But what has happened more is the pressure. If you look at the right-hand side, customers are increasingly demanding, right? They expect the technology to work. They want to know that it's solving a business problem, and the way in which they want to consume or establish the commercial contracts runs the gamut from the high end, the white shoes consultancies, all the way down to just buy and assemble and self-maintain it. And that, in some ways, is kind of changing what needs to happen within the ecosystem. Patrick?
Yeah, and I would just add, so when you look at everything on the right there, for enterprise clients, those preferences, those purchase options can all exist, maybe not all, but multiple options can exist even within the same client. They can be looking for both prime contracts, and they can be looking for multi-vendor contracts. They can be looking to buy on a subscription. They can be looking to buy the tools, and they'll put it together themselves. So when we look at the leading vendors in the IT services space, in the management consulting space, in the technology space generally, it's that those vendors are able to meet their clients wherever their clients want them to be met. I mean, I know that sounds really simplistic, but it's super important that they're not locked into one way of doing business. They're willing to do business with their clients. And again, any single client may have multiple ways that they want to do business depending on which part of the enterprise you're dealing with.
So in a simple analogy, the way I think of this, the ecosystem impediments versus my screen's blocked, what's it say? The buyer shifts is really ecosystem impediments. You can think of it as you love the product, but it was somewhat hostile to get at. And the example is, the Seinfeld episode of the Soup Nazi. You love the soup, but you really hated how you had to get there. And that was sort of the anchor vendors dictating those commercial terms, which were to the benefit of their own internal middle office functions, not to the benefit of the customer, not to the benefit of the partner. So they had those terms. It had to comply with the internal silos, and a lot of the commercial alliance arrangements were driven by that. Now it's okay when it's large to large, big firm to big firm. Ernst & Young with Kyndryl, which just announced an alliance this morning as we were prepping for the call. Because they'll work together and they'll figure it out and they'll sort of set it and forget it. But if you're a small firm, as everything is sort of converging, you may be approved as one track within this anchor vendor system, but the customer wants you to behave in a way that is a different track. And you're caught in the bureaucracy of this large firm. You're not really doing anything that's adding or delivering customer value. And that comes from all the buyer shifts that Patrick really went into at the top here, where the commoditization, the way that we just pick up our phone and we know that it works, that's what they're expecting about the IT, underpinning whatever the business problem is that they are indeed solving.
Yeah, and just to unpack that a little bit, and I could dive into the right side of this slide for hours, but I want to focus on the first 2 bullets. And this, there are no more mysteries around technology. I mean, yes, quantum, Jeff can talk about quantum, but I don't understand it. So maybe that's why it's a mystery to me. But the mystery really is gone. There are no buyers out there who are not already tech native, don't understand the technology they're buying. Everyone consumes it constantly and naturally. So that leads to the second part, which is buyers expect the technology to work. You can't sell technology based on it being faster or being the right technology or being cheap. Everyone expects it's going to be the right technology. It's going to work fast. It's going to be cheap. That's the world we live in, where that's the expectation around technology. It really is about what is the business problem that it's trying to solve. And we have for years been going to conferences and vendor events where they talk about business problem on the main stage, and as soon as you get to the next level down, or as soon as they click down once, it's immediately about the speeds and feeds and the technology, and they're trying to sell solutions, and they're thinking and talking and positioning themselves about solutions. It's really not about the tech. It is always about the solution that the buyers want. The buyers want you to solve their problem. Another sort of mantra we have around here is that technology isn't the problem, the people are the problem.
Yeah.
And when you think about what that means, if the people are the problem, it's a business problem that you're trying to solve, not a technology problem. Obviously, a soapbox I can jump on. So
Right.
climb down for a moment. Let you go next.
Yeah, well, you just stick around. You'll get back on there soon enough. What we have here, one of the other things that we do are what we call in-depth interviews or executive level interviews on a commissioned or a custom basis, where we will go out on behalf of a large technology vendor and talk to targeted customers and targeted buyers. And so the ecosystem challenges that we're talking about was listening to small partners of large anchor vendor technology programs and the frustrations they have with sort of the old way that these are going. So one of the ones that we talked about is the idea that as technology is converging, the way in which a business will engage with the customer, one minute the customer may want them to be the prime or the SI, or they may just want their intellectual property, or they may want them there for certain pieces of it. Again, if you had the soup Nazi as the old way, the new way is Burger King, have it your way, right? So that challenge is that is the bureaucratic mindset that says you're approved as an ISV, we don't know how to allow you to do system integration work. That has nothing to do with the client. That has everything to do with the back office administrative functions of the anchor vendor, and probably has, instead of technical debt, has a lot of legal debt. They don't want to try to go to the legal department and change contracts. They don't want to tell their upper managers about what the issue is. But the solution is simple, sort of smart contracts that just have sort of, instead of margin stacking, it's got to come more from a revenue sharing perspective. And the born on the cloud, as we call them, the software as a service vendors, Salesforce.com, ServiceNow, or Workday, some names. They do it with a simple percentage of net revenue. They don't care who writes the contract with the customer or what goes on. They just want to make sure they're getting their piece, their percentage of net revenue. And the rest of it, I don't want to say it's the wild, wild west, but they have the flexibility. And that is an appeal to the small vendors. The other challenge is, these are the things you have to think about beyond just the market opportunity, is the IP version control. And what we mean by that, different versions of software. The OEM license may not have every piece of the intellectual property of the software app of the anchor vendor, for example. You have the difference between an on-premise license and a software as a service version. SaaS versions are updated about every 2 weeks. The end customer license, they typically batch it up and they send the updates out in 3 or 6 months increments. So the IP that could be out in the wild for a very large customer that has pieces of the asset that are in a third-party OEM version. They may have an on-prem piece, and they may have the licensing piece. So that requires taking a look at those vendors and what their DevOps practices are to understand that your technological development that you may be doing as a little partner it's the dance music to make sure you're in the same cadence as those others. Sales ownership, you've got is it a registered deal? Who was supposed to take it? Are you allowed to be in there? Fluid selling motions that are just there on customer preference rather than anchor vendor preference. Again, with the mystery removed from technology, the control of the engagement is less by the vendors and more by the end customers, because they don't see distinction necessarily in some of the core technology layers. The other piece, IP disaggregation. What we're talking about there is you may have an anchor vendor software package that has, I'm making all this up, but like 30 different services. Some of them, not all services are as good as others. And it could be the small vendor does 4 or 5 of those really, really well. They want to make sure that they're not going to get sort of blocked out by the large vendor, and the end customer may want that as well. When we talk about API connections and easy ways to do this. So that IP disaggregation, niche vendors are really taking a look at that, and they want to make sure they'll be held, kept whole. And lastly, SLA service level agreement, the performance finger pointing. If there is a problem, it can't be that the anchor vendor just goes, well, it's not my problem, it's the other vendor, here's a number to call. They want to know that whenever they come in with a service performance complaint, that it will just get addressed, that they won't hear, it's not my problem. They don't want to see that kind of stuff going on.
Yeah, and then sort of the one of the implications of that is the whole, one throat to choke thing is really, it's gone. I mean, clients, customers, buyers want to know that you're working well within the ecosystem, that as a vendor, no matter what your size or what your role is, that you play well in the sandbox. I want to come back to the fourth point there, because I think it's a really important one around that IP disaggregation. For the really large IT services vendors and consultancies, I think we know that they've been seeing this shift happening for a while. And what they've been looking for, and it's a pivot from what used to be vendor agnostic or technology agnostic. So the very large IT services vendors and consultancies would tell you they would work with anyone. Well, what we're seeing now is a shift to where they're saying we're picking the very best niche solutions, or the very best startups, the very best companies to be working with to solve very specific problems. We were meeting with a big 4 firm in Boston a couple of months ago, and we went through their cloud practice, and we looked at how they were picking within a particular industry, within a particular sub-vertical, within a particular solution that part of the migration to cloud or part of running on the cloud, they had certain vendors that they wanted to work with. So when they went to their clients, they didn't say, hey, we can work with anybody and do anything. We can bring you any cloud you want. We can bring you any solution. They said, no, we know what works best, and what works best is this. So what that really means, and we think that approach, that mindset really does actually sell very well, because you're not just saying, hey, yeah, we work with anybody. Well, you work with anybody, then who are you really working with? So if you're one of those smaller niche software tech vendors, what you need to be looking for is because it's not everybody, who are the leading IT services vendors and consultancies that are thinking that way, that are planning that way, that are working that way. And you have to be able to look beyond the surface level. Yeah, we work with anybody, to where are they making investments? Who are they acquiring? What kind of talent are they training? What are the pieces that they're building, and where do we slot in? So again, another soapbox.
Well, I can tie into that as we hit the transition. It was a managed services conference in New York City where I was hearing it, and what they were the same thing. They've got the comparable kind of vendor selections. Is they're not necessarily going to entertain bleeding edge technology unless it does solve a unique business problem. Right. And what the pandemic backlash, whatever you want to call it, is we had the crisis mode management of outfitting and equipping, and there were the problems with the tech not working, right, or just user error, poor training, for whatever reasons. We all have our our war stories about that. And what were saying clients want to know is that it works. I just want to know that it works. And that is the idea that they will vet it, they will bless it, they will give the certification and go on from there. So that was kind of a diversion to the chart that's up. But what we tried to do here, you understand the cube as we laid it out. And what we were saying is that anchor vendor's gray front would be the one that dictated it in that hub and spoke fashion. And the evolutions that are slowly happening and are an impediment to some of the more traditional technology vendors today is the rigid bureaucratic nature. It's got to be that it's an ecosystem set of considerations and an ecosystem set of definitions. And, I can jump off to the shiny objects of like blockchain and smart contracts and how that can all work. We know, we heard it multiple times. Patrick and I were in attendance at several different blockchain conferences for Ernst & Young, where they talked about the joint venture with Microsoft to solve this for gaming developers. Now you think of the slew of gaming developers they would have. It was small dollars, it was bespoke spreadsheets. It was, in our opinion, although the two vendors took exception when they said it, sort of noise level, and you just wanted to solve a channel conflict problem. And they stripped out about 80% of the labor. They turned it around so that you could figure out what you had accrued within 4 minutes, where before it used to take like 90 days. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about, as an ecosystem has to agree on it. And it can't just be to the benefit of the anchor vendor and silos that align to anchor vendor bureaucracy. And where it's being solved currently, for the most part, are the advisory-led SIs serving as the orchestrator of the commercial agreement, because they have the market clout. They can dictate, they're big, they can dictate big to big terms, and they can keep the small vendors whole, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah. One of the notes that Jeff shared before this was, just the idea that any time spent on those administrative aspects of delivering technology to a client is non-value added to the client. So if we're talking about improving the ecosystem, it's got to happen there.
Right. It's blockchain to strip the labor out, the hollow calories.
Right.
So this is here is a set of the data that Patrick's team has assembled when we're giving you the example here, because we have the engagement revenue by the leading SI and by the leading hyperscaler. So this will show the shared, and then also a discussion of the shared importance of the partnership, how many personnel they have in the domain area, what is their sales coverage or breadth and depth, what are the key alliance hubs, are they joint hubs, what acquisitions are they making around. So these are the executive level, I'm calling it big to big. And the way we heard two of these big alliance partners speaking about it on stage when we were asking questions about the commercial model, it's also the technology roadmap and the view of what it's going to look like in the future, is the idea that they work with intentionality to achieve a common market vision. So it's not wrestling over squeezing a little bit more margin. It's, what's the broad view? Where are you headed? Is it in alignment with us? And how can we work together to get there together?
I love this piece of research. The first version came out in June. It took us about 2 years to finally do this, because we had to really clearly define what it was we were going after. And it really is the cloud services and ecosystem. It's not, it's not just the alliances as they're put out on their websites, but the real details behind it. The first half of this report is all about the trends. What are the trends and the drivers that are changing what's happening in the alliance ecosystem? And it's for 10 IT services vendors and then the 3 hyperscalers. What I love here, and you can see all the data that comes with each profile of each one of those 10 IT services vendors, is then we give the additional context. If you look at that number on the bottom right, 55%. So after we spend half of the report talking about how important the hyperscalers are and these relationships are, and after we show you 3.7 billion, 2.2 billion, 50,000 plus, after we show you all these very large numbers, we remind you that, hey, 55% of Accenture's cloud business actually comes from relationships other than with the hyperscalers. So we do that for each of the 10 so that you sort of have an understanding of where it's moving. And that's actually kind of an invitation. If you're not one of the hyperscalers, if you're not in the top half of this, or the top 9/10 of this particular chart, there's a lot of room for you there in that ecosystem. So again, I'm in love with this piece of research. I think it's awesome. The two guys that put it together, absolutely fantastic. Obviously, another soapbox of mine. I got a lot. All right, Jeff.
Yeah. I'm kind of biased.
I got a room full of soapboxes.
Room full of soapboxes.
Apparently, I got a lot of soap.
So as we were framing the discussion, it was, well, do we do it from the vantage point of the large vendors? Do we do it from the vantage point of the smalls? And really, the bigger challenge is those who are going to have to be more careful are the smaller firms, because you're the 30, 40, 100 person company. You may see the dollar signs blinking that if we can get on the Amazon marketplace, we'll make money while we'll sleep. But you can take your eye off the way you're moving your business forward. Maybe it's not going as fast as you would like, but you have momentum. And if you don't think kind of about the establishment of the alliance and crawl, walk, run, you can get blinded by the bigness, I guess is a way to put it. So the critical questions was, how well do you align? If you're a small vendor, you really need to think about establishing almost the business prospectus to that firm to show them what's in it for them if they work with you. And that's the alignment of the revenue within the space. And it could very well be they don't have a lot of revenue in there, but if they have deemed it strategic or made the statements that it's an area they want to focus on, the fact that you could bring it there could be important to them. So it isn't necessarily that they have to be strong, but have they focused it on it? And then what's the sales structure they have by customer size and by industry segment? How will you align and slot into their go-to-market? That's sort of the very top level of how we're going to get deals put together. But now you have to start taking a look at some of the admin, the middle office and back office layers of the general go-to-market. Deal registration rigor. Will they allow for joint selling? Do they have the flexible commercial arrangements? Marketplace access. We hear all the time in these interviews with the small firms, that's a big draw.
Yeah.
That's a bigger draw necessarily than the technical support. But within the tech side, do you have the access to experts? Will that large vendor do some of the testing and give you some guidance? Will you have almost like a assigned mentor that can help you, learn how to kind of learn the sheet music of how to work with them on those electronic tool sets, documentation, self-paced training, all these things are typically available, but, really take a look, see what they've got. And, the large vendor tech stack, we talked about the release cycles. That can be a huge problem. The underlying infrastructure and technology compatibility to your stack. Are they using the same utilities and tools? What's their testing? Their dev test sort of layers. Is it stuff that you have people who know about? Can you find people out in the job market that will come to you to do it? And then just the response time and supportiveness. If you've got a 3-alarm fire in your own tech stack and you need some L3, L4 support, can you get it and get it quickly?
Yeah. So Jeff shared the slide with me and he called it a cursory list. I'm like, come on, man. So there's a lot there. And I think one of the points that he's making is that, this is where you start. And then it really is that conversation. You cannot do this just by scrubbing a website, you have to have those conversations. You have to do the deep research.
Think of, your COO will, where can you have the exploding cigar?
Yeah.
Right. Where is it? You want to make sure you don't light it.
Right.
And then from that, so that's what you need to, as a small firm, evaluate to figure out who do you want to try to engage. And then as you engage, we heard it over and over again. Typically what these executives that we were speaking with were people who had spent the early part of their career in what I'll call successful software as a service vendors as we know them today, the Salesforces, Workdays, etc. And they had left there to start their own firms to essentially replicate the SaaS business model and align with different technology partners. So they had I won't say they had created the blueprint for success, but they had grown up under a culture where they learned it. And it was almost unanimous that you have to do it. You got to have the executive level sort of strategic alignment. And when you go to those executives, what they said is you really need to have 3 or 4 opportunities you can bring right away, or a track record that says we have X number of joint customers already. This is why these joint customers use us. You've got to sell them on why they should give this little firm more attention than the average little, I guess is the way to put it. But on the flip side of that, from the bottom up, you don't want to just like run out and blast it to the all the Workday sales, as an example, all the Workday sales personnel. You want to pick your spots. You want to find 1 or 2 opportunities with high close where you can prove your value by just handing the order to somebody in sales, who then will talk you up as, hey, they really know what they're doing, they're very professional, etc., and then get it internally promoted. So and then on the development side, having your mentors or know who to call. So top down, you got to show what's in it for them, and then bottom up, you got to just serve a couple of them on a platter.
Yeah, and I want to come at this from a slightly different angle by looking at it from the vendors that we cover, that my practice looks at in depth, the bigs, that we look at in depth, and talk about 3 things that have really have changed over the last. They were beginning to change pre-pandemic, accelerated through the pandemic, very much trends that I think are enormously important to understand in the broader alliance ecosystem. When we talk about alliances, you're going to see me look at my notes. I want to make sure I get this right. This is really important. First, I mentioned already that the we work with everyone approach is going away. It's we curate who we partner with, and we're better for being more focused. And the implication for that, of course, is that maybe the most important thing that any company can do, big or small or medium, is clearly define what they actually do. It's one of another one of our mantras here at TBR when we look at IT services and management consultancies and their business practices and their business models. The ones that try to be end-to-end and do everything are the ones that typically don't do as well. The ones that you can't exactly pin down what they do well, they don't do as well. The companies that are have clearly defined what it is they do and they deliver on what they do. And it makes sense within an ecosystem. You want to know what your alliance partner is able to do, what they're known for, what they're best at. You don't want to just be a partner with everybody. The second thing is, and this is really something that accelerated during the pandemic, is that alliances are getting measured on a wider range of metrics than they used to be. This audience, Jeff, probably knows this better than I do.
Yeah.
They've probably been living with it for the last few years.
Yeah.
But it's not just the pull-through revenue, but it's also expanding client footprint. It's not just go-to-market campaigns, it's joint thought leadership paired with R&D around specific solutions. It's not just headcount. This is a real critical one. It's not just the headcount that's trained on a particular partner's technology.
Right.
It's the ability to deploy that headcount immediately anywhere. Everybody has talent, but if you can't actually bring that talent to your client, then it doesn't matter that you have talent. All of your alliance partners have talent. If they don't have talent, then you can jointly deploy your joint clients. It doesn't matter. So again, the implication for that, I think, across the ecosystem is it's important to understand that the way you're being measured and the way that you should be measuring your alliance partners has also been changing, and you need to know what it is that's most important to your partners. And then third is my latest soapbox that I like to get up on, and that's about differentiation. I don't think within the IT services and management consulting space that anyone can differentiate on technology, on talent, or on innovation. I can go off on a long tangent about why I think that's true. It's exceedingly difficult to differentiate on those 3 areas. You also can't differentiate on scale unless you're Accenture or Deloitte or TCS or some other massive company. You're not going to have these 700 and some odd thousand people that Accenture can bring to the table. So the easiest way to differentiate is by how well you work with others, is being able to be the best alliance partner. How easy is it to do business with you? How much do you eliminate those administrative barriers that Jeff was talking about earlier? Being that good ecosystem partner is the fastest way to growth It's faster than being the smartest. It's faster than having the best tech. It's faster than trying to convince people that you're the most innovative. It's faster than trying to hire 700,000 people and be like Accenture. So I can't say this strongly enough. If you are not a good partner in the ecosystem, you're slowing yourself down.
Yeah.
All right. That was my last soapbox.
There you go.
Until somebody asks a question that gets me up on another one.
So, well, there are some questions.
Do you want to do any kind of recap on all of this, or should we go right to the Q&A?
Why don't we get into the Q&A?
Sure.
And because the first question we see here, all of this sounds so easy. Well, of course, we're consultants, so we don't have to execute. But all of this sounds so easy. But the major vendors still have legacy business with legacy models. How do they maintain new models and existing models simultaneously? Well, personally, I looked at the shift from on-premise license to software subscriptions back in 2014, 15, and the conversion ratios and the challenges. So really what it is that mid-level bureaucratic layer, there's several different problems. The middle-level managers who are hearing these complaints are reticent to bring it up to the executives because the executives know what an internal lift it's going to be to convert. You've got to get legal contracts changed. You've got to change executive compensation models, all these different things. So the problem is more the reticence of the legacy vendors to innovate, and it's not necessarily cannibalizing revenue. It's just changing your monetization policies. And an article I have sent to internal TBR people as well as to clients it's from the McKinsey Insights series. It's an interview with Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, from 2017 or 18, somewhere in that period of time. He changed executive compensation. He made it less about the siloed business models and the all-up corporate revenue sharing. Again, kind of the same thing of an ecosystem. We're all in this together. Whether the revenue gets recognized in this siloed business model or that siloed business model doesn't matter. It's that Microsoft got the revenue. And that was one of the changes he made. And quite frankly, they were one of the ones who had to do a lot of that pivot from license to subscription with Office to Office 365, a lot of forced migrations. So it isn't that it's easy, it's that what's needed is pretty obvious, but it's hard because it's change management.
Yeah, the change management part, again, that gets back to my comment about the technology is never a problem, the people are the problem. And that's just another way of saying change management is always at the heart of whether or not something works or doesn't work. Two other quick thoughts on it. When we look at the vendors that we look at, and when we get in conversations with our clients about these vendors, oftentimes the perception is, if you take like the IT services vendors, the India-centric, so Wipro, Tata, TCS, Infosys, HCL, Cognizant, everybody lumps them together. As soon as we get on the phone and start talking about them, we start to see what all the differences are. They're not the same. So yes, those are legacy IT services vendors. Understanding how their strategies and their investments are different is the difference between being an alliance partner who's just trying to be one of their partners and being an alliance partner that figures out, okay, where do I really fit? HCL bought a huge software practice from IBM. So if you're a software vendor that can meld well with what IBM is doing in software, then there's your opening with HCL. The same could be true of the big four firms. The big four firms are all the same, right? I mean, we hear that again and again, especially in the audit and tax side. They're wildly different. PwC launched an entire software practice. PwC is now a software vendor. And if you're in PwC's alliance ecosystem and you don't understand how PwC is going to market now with software as a service, with managed services built on software, with platforms and solutions, if you don't understand PwC is very different from their big four peers' way of looking at the way that consulting is changing, then you don't understand PwC. So the answer to the question is yes, it is easy. It's really, really hard to execute on. So, all right, what's the other question, John?
Well, this one is, this is the one I thought would tee up, is in this evolving landscape you're portraying, do system integrators become more important as a bridge between customers, vendors, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, they are. I mean, well, if there are any of my friends from the SIs on the call, they're going to be like, how come you're not saying it's always been true? It's always been true. And the big four firms, as they have gone more into the SI space, have shown that their role as orchestrators is incredibly important, in part because of the sort of base level of trust that they bring to it, that they just have around their brand. So yeah, I think the answer is yes, they are going to become more important, but it goes back to Jeff's point earlier about getting rid of that administrative waste. Because these firms, these SIs are huge, and they're culturally built in certain ways. One of the reasons why a lot of the either India-centric or hardware-centrics, think of like a Dell or a DXC or a, back in the day, CSC and HPE. The reason why those SIs struggle to build consulting practices is because consulting isn't easy. Consulting is harder to do than it looks. And consulting takes a different culture and mindset and business model, and really importantly, a different sales approach. So unless you're prepared to change your business model, you're not going to be able to change your business model. I mean, that sounds so simple. It's so critically important. So are the SIs going to be more important? Yes. The SIs that understand how their role is changing and the SIs that are able to change definitely will. There's a ton of money to be made by just simply delivering on what SIs have delivered on forever. I mean, the long tail of managed services and outsourcing goes on for forever. There's a ton of money to be made there. Those margins are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the companies that understand how they can use that long tail of managed services to then actually build into consulting engagements, build into digital transformation, whatever that is, engagements, that's where it's at.
See, now I'm going to hop on the soapbox because the line, and you've heard it from me in our conversations, is to me, the last bastion of relevance in the technology sector are the big four advisory firms. And why do I say this? Because they are the ones, the compute in and of itself is increasingly, if not commoditized. It's becoming utility. And the value is in the translation to the business practices and the business operations. And who is better equipped to do that than the folks with the tax and audit chops that'll keep you out of, or keep you in regulatory compliance, right, and keep you from getting fined, and be able to give you on the fly updates as to what the advice is. If you're operating in Sri Lanka, they just changed the HR payroll to this, and you have to do the following. They can do that is one of the things that's important. But the other part of it is they don't necessarily want to get further down the tech stack. They will be happy to partner for the traditional break fix, close to the box kind of work.
Right.
And it's just a question of setting up the terms. That's EY, Kyndryl, IBM. I mean, those are the bigs. And then it's like, oh, this niche utility player. Yeah, this fits. We know it works. We can, having, instead of Intel inside, sort of an EY or a KPMG blessing of these guys in SIC code X 1, 2, 3, 4. We use them, they're best in class. Right. That can work.
And because those guys all know that's where the market is headed, that's why they're starting to shift their alliances to reflect that rather than reflect that we'll work with anybody.
Right.
Which again, you work with anybody, you're working with them.
Well, that's the headline I had, protecting them from the bleeding edge. Right. You know, hey, take it easy. You want to make sure this works right. Because you could be out of compliance on data, and that could cost you money, right?
All right. Is there another question?
Have you seen a partnership between tech companies that doesn't have direct commercial agreements but yield significant business outcomes? Something like Red Hat and Splunk. Well, when I'm looking at Splunk, I know.
Yeah, you know Splunk and Red Hat better than I do.
Well, Splunk's challenge was. My understanding, I haven't looked at them in a while, but they, going back to the first question we answered about legacy vendors and legacy models, Splunk had sort of on-prem license. They had to convert over to cloud. There's always that big dip in the leap of faith of your operating model is going to get tanked for a while as you're evangelizing to get to the subscription layer. And Red Hat I mean, you know, Red Hat is the IBM Hail Mary path, and it's working to an extent, but again, if you're writing to Red Hat versus AWS, Azure, or Google, it could be they think the development teams, it isn't that big of a deal to do that, but boy, look at that marketplace. You know, the shiny object is the marketplace.
I think the only thing that jumps to my mind, and I'm completely biased because I spend a lot of time with the management consultancies and the larger of the SIs, is that a lot of I'm sure you're all familiar with the innovation, what we call innovation and transformation centers, those sort of experience centers, greenhouses, applied innovation exchange, liquid studio. Everybody has their own name for it, which all makes sense. So what we've seen change with those is where they had been very closely protected in terms of brand and who was there. And by who was there, I mean, it was only the people that owned the center. They didn't have their technology partners there. They are now all bringing their technology partners there, and in some cases even branding. So when you go to the best example I can think of is EY's facility in Cleveland and Nottingham Spurk. When you go to their wave space, you will actually see on the walls branded their technology partners. I believe Microsoft, SAP, maybe Blue
ServiceNow.
ServiceNow. I think GE Digital is there. So I don't fully know what the commercials are, but I'm pretty sure those technology partners are not paying to be there and to be branded. But every single client that comes through an engagement at the Wave Space will see, in Cleveland, will see, okay, these are EY's technology partners. And when it's appropriate, those people are there. There's someone from SAP on site for an engagement, which is, again, I'm not entirely sure how the commercials are broken out there, but that's an example of where the alliance partner is essential, because clients were going to these sessions, and you spend 2 days talking about the art of the possible, and we're gonna go off into the great, the blue yonder here,
Horizon
and
3,
do amazing, incredible stuff, and then the client goes back to their home office and they look around and they're like, my ERP, my SAP instance is so old, and I've got this clunky IT infrastructure. I can't do all these things we talked about because we didn't have the technology partners in the room that could say, yeah, these are the constraints you're actually living with, and here's how we're going to move you beyond it. So I think that's one of the most important changes that we've seen in the last few years around those centers, and that ties right into the alliance as well.
And one other thing, as you were speaking, that I thought of here, because it's not the codified commercial agreements. Well, what I would say is, look at the share leaders and where the share leaders have overlap within customers, because there's an opportunity. If Red Hat's ubiquitous and Splunk is ubiquitous, and you can have a value proposition that somehow marries the two in a way that Red Hat and Splunk are doing, you have a winning proposition within that customer set. So then if you're a small, you got to find a big who has a similar alignment, who goes, oh, that's a good idea, and off you go.
Okay. Do you have other questions? Kim might have had some that came in separately, or we might be out of time.
Right. We have the free, we got to mention the free trial too.
Start your free trial.
So if you guys want to wrap things up, we could have time for one more question if you want, but if you want to kind of tie a bow on it.
Sure, we'll do one more, and then we'll talk about Insight Center a little bit.
One of the questions that came in before was, a lot of companies have different tiers of alliance partners, and they want to know if you've published research on relative value of being on different tiers and the revenue differences between the levels.
We don't necessarily in the syndicated. We will have when they make major changes, and it's usually the metallurgy of platinum, gold, titanium, and whatever, or strategic and preferred, and so on. And that's usually a channel flush. They got to rename it because of legal, so that they can make some changes and get rid of some of the dormant. We don't, but we do that a lot on a custom basis to do the translations of this company's definition of a platinum is this company's strategic yada yada and so on. So we can take a look at it. That tiering is either for the revenue size or the strategic. You either get it because you're big, or you get it because you're important to a strategic focus of that firm.
I would say that we are technology business research, so we care about the business. We're not technology marketing research, which would be like, what is the marketing that's done around those different alliances? We care more about what's it. And in order to get into what is the revenue difference, or what could we expect out of being this level partner, you know, a 1-tier level partner or a higher tier level partner, that's the kind of thing we have to do. It's all custom work. That's super in depth. So we do have to talk about the free trial on Insight Center.
Yeah, on the Insight Center.
So what we did, so Insight Center, very quickly, we have a massive amount of data. TBR has been around for 20 something years. We've been looking at all these companies and all their changes and all the way that they, all the data that we've collected that they've provided, massive amount of data. We publish quarterly. So every time a company releases its earnings, we publish first what we really think, and then 2 weeks later, what we really think. We go into a much deeper report on it. So our clients were receiving that information every quarter on a very regular cadence, and that's all helpful. What we've done with Insight Center, we said, okay, how about if clients could just tap into the data and the analysis when they want it, how they want it, be able to grab specific data points and compare them to another company's specific data points. So if you care about what is Accenture's consulting business in Europe versus what is Deloitte's consulting in Europe, you would normally have to wait until we publish reports on both and then run it yourself. Now you can just go into Insight Center and say, give me this data point, give me this data point. Let me build out either a chart, a map, a board is what we usually call them, and be able to look at the different companies in your own custom way. It's the kind of thing that allows us to then sit back and say, okay, if we're watching people as they go in the Insight Center, grabbing these particular pieces of the data and building their own boards, then now we know we need to go after those particular things in greater detail. We need to pay more attention to that. So it's a way of both providing our clients with more data quicker and more analysis quicker, rather than on our cadence, and at the same time allowing us to see what's the most important thing to our clients by observing what are the things that people are asking questions about, what are they consuming when they go to Insight Center.
Right. This is the modernization of our platform into something that's highly interactive for the customers, as opposed to asking us if we could run a cut or do we have it this way or that way. They can go and drag and drop. They can have their own custom message boards. They can flag which alerts they want to get when, and it does provide a feedback loop to us as to what's important or how come everybody wants to see it this way. What, have we missed something in the market?
Excellent. Sounds like a great platform, guys.
It is.
Very powerful, and
it's getting some good reviews. It's getting good reviews.
What piqued my interest is it's kind of similar to what we're trying to do, and being able to track on the back end what your clients and customers are interested in is extremely powerful. So it's kind of a win-win, so that's good.
Well, at the end of the day, we're an intelligence shop. So we need to provide intelligence that our clients can't get anywhere else. In order to know what they're most interested in, we need to have that feedback. I can always draw the intelligence cycle. The last part of it is always the feedback that comes from the client to inform the next round of intelligence gathering. So that's what we do.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. This was a wonderful webinar, and I can tell you both present quite a bit together because it was great banter and good stories, and you kind of built off of one another, and I loved it. So, and I think our audience did as well. And to those of you in our audience, thank you for being with us today. I hope that I know that you probably found this very helpful. We will be getting the recording and the slide deck out likely next week to everybody that's registered, including yourself, and that will be in the ASAP Content Hub. But until next time, be well, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
I hope you all found the replay interesting and valuable. We're going to pivot now to our live Q&A with Patrick Heffernan and Hristov. Please put your questions into the Q&A box if you haven't already, and now I'll hand it over to Patrick and Boz.
Excellent, thank you so much. And not only have we never done this before, this sort of rebroadcast and then live Q&A, but we're actually filming it too. And if the video comes out good, then you'll get to see it. Comes out bad, you won't get to see it. So we got a whole bunch of questions that came in, and appreciate everybody listening in and sending them in. So we're going to start with one that is a bit more of a statement than a question, but I think the person who asked just wants us to respond. So it says, with regard to go-to-market with the large GSIs, would you agree that based on GSI's broad industry experience, they are in a better position to define what is the best way to position the vendor's offering as part of GSI's consulting exercise? I think that means they have the most industry expertise, so they can position any kind of engagement around industry. But then the person says vendors have a limit on how to position their offering as part of the broader digital transformation approach, and the GSIs know that better. So, Boz, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's the value that the GSIs, the management consultants, bring to the table more often than not, and some of them are a little bit more proven value and have the frameworks to do it, is really around the industry knowledge. Having the business processes, understanding how it all flows, approaching the opportunities more from advisory-led approach and business outcome, kind of the end game, is more suited in their DNA for the most part, versus some of the technology vendors be a little bit more transactional in a way and think about, okay, let's try to sell more of what we have from a SKU perspective. And so having the relationship with the GSIs is important because it's something that they kind of have that layer, the understanding, have the ear of the business unit leads as well, which is an important factor to introduce those new portfolio offerings that maybe the technology vendors are working and developing in the background. So that's definitely agree, and I think it's an important piece of the ecosystem to understand how to collaborate better, understanding which vendor is strong in which industry, and understanding that having one too many industry may not be always the perfect case under your portfolio. So which vendor is really going deep in a particular industry is also an important factor to align your portfolio.
We've talked about that a lot before because there are some GSIs that want to cover every single industry and be focused on every industry. And if you're focused on everything, you're not focused on anything. So that's from the GSI perspective. I think also too, there's what we've seen from the hyperscalers in the last couple of years has been this push towards industry clouds. I mean, it existed before, it's come back. So when you marry up industry clouds with also some investment, not like existential threat investment, but some investment in consulting and services by AWS, by Microsoft, by Google, I think you can see that everyone recognizes how critical industry is from a go-to-market and honestly from a relationship. When the person writes broad industry experience is another word for relationships. So long-term relationships, not the transactional part. So. Excellent. So we're in agreement with this person. All right. Next question. I've seen a few of the large companies build special business development teams focused on the startup ecosystem. For example, Microsoft for startups. Also, some of the VCs are becoming more active in helping their portfolio companies break into large SIs and hyperscalers. How do you see this progressing, and will it be successful? I'll start with the startups part because I have a kind of a strong opinion on this. I don't think any one of the companies that we've ever tracked has ever made startups a top priority within their own business. It's not. It might be part of their strategy. It might be part of how they think that they go to market. It might be part of their branding, but it's not core. Nobody's core business is dependent on building a startup community. I mean, I'm sure there are some companies that do that, but the companies we're talking about, the large, the global SIs and the large consultancies, that's an important piece, but it's not a critical piece. It's maybe not even a strategic piece for most of them. So I think, but you're always going to see initiatives around it. Atos had a really strong initiative around the startup community that started a few years ago. PwC put one of their experience centers in a specific area in Berlin specifically to build up that startup community. But those are initiatives, those are ideas, those are, I don't want to say side projects, that's dismissing it, but they're not going to be driving. They may move the bottom line a little bit, but they're not really driving the business. They're not core. So I think startups is important. The value that a lot of the big four firms or the consultancies and even the SIs can have for the startups is providing that layer of trust, so that the client can say, okay, we trust, we believe that the startup is worth working with because they're partnered with, a PwC or an EY or somebody like that. So I think for the startups, the GSIs are enormously valuable in the credibility that they lend. the scale that they open up, the opportunities with clients. For the GSIs and the consultancies, the startups are important in order to tap into that the technology. Startups are important as part of your larger strategy, but they are not core. I don't know if you agree, disagree on that.
Yeah, no, I think, I agree. I mean, obviously, from the startups community point of view, I guess I think it's not to the table for a moment here is they are vying for the attention of the big guys, right? So it's an important piece to think about them. But I think it's important for another reason. What we see from our customer research around the importance of the ecosystem, niche local vendors come up more often than not, and partnering, collaborating, working with them, it's something that buyers do appreciate when the bigger vendors bring into and are willing to work with them. So to your point, yes, I mean, they are not, the startups will not be the one that will move the needle or break it to make it for the big vendors, but they should not be ignored.
Right.
I think it's important to pay attention to know, is the next Salesforce coming? Is the next Databricks coming around the corner? Is the next Snowflake coming? So these are kind of important pieces that, as the ecosystem evolves, the big vendors have to think about. So the second part of that question.
Well, just to answer the question sort of very directly, when he says build business development teams, will that progress or will it be successful? I think there's never going to be a progression beyond where it is. There's going to be little hit or misses here, and people will it be successful? I think we just said it's, even if it is, it's not going to move the needle. The second part was around VCs becoming more active in helping their portfolio companies break into large SIs and hyperscalers. What do you think on that?
Again, I'll try to probably flip that question the other way around. What we have seen from our research is the opportunity market that the large SIs, large consultancies are kind of going after right now. The PE market is hot. We know that the VC, the PE community, private equity community has invested tremendous amount of money in the last 10 years, and buying a lot of companies under their portfolio. So the large SIs, the large technology vendors, consultancies, they see as an opportunity to service those clients and trying to develop the retuned or recalibrate their sales approach to the PE because the PE usually they want a quicker ROI. They have their targets, obviously. So from an SI perspective, I think if they see that market as an opportunity market to service, to target, and to expand, just from a services point of view overall. So to answer that question is like, how much are the VCs trying to get into the SIs to work with the SIs? I think it's the SIs actually working and looking into expanding to that market. So there's an opportunity for collaboration always. But I think it's the large SIs and the consultants are kind of like an eye on that market a little bit more as an opportunity moving forward.
Right. And I think that's, and I'm probably best to understand it as everybody's looking for the opportunity to exploit the other, Yeah, exactly. All right. So another question, TBR has said that Accenture is the gold standard for services and technology alliances. What makes them so good? I would also say that we did hear from Liz at Capgemini that Accenture is the Kardashians of the services business. But anyway, shout out to her. But what do you think, Boz? What makes them so good at alliances?
Well, I think we'll have to look into Accenture overall and who they are as a company, as an organization, scale, the capacity and the capabilities that they bring into, in multiple industries, in multiple technology areas, has laid a good foundation for Accenture to build that trust within the ecosystem, both with the alliance partners as well as the buyers, around the entire stakeholder ecosystem. So what Accenture has done and has led the way that many of its peers have replicated and emulated in some respect is building really that cohesiveness, joint venture, and business groups kind of structures around some of the key alliances. So they started with Microsoft back in 20 years ago, the joint venture Heffernan with Microsoft. And fast forward, they start launching, business groups with the likes of AWS and Google, and again, they actually evolved to Microsoft into Microsoft, but with VMware and others, they have about a dozen of business groups, and with SAP Oracle. So when we talk about business groups, those are kind of a joint investment from both Accenture and technology partner, and joint investments both on the resource perspective, human and financial, as well as portfolio investment that they collaborate on developing, which in a way has elevated the trust within that ecosystem with the buyers. Buyers know that Accenture has the people that will be deployed in a particular geography, in a particular industry, that have the knowledge that SAP stands behind, has a stamp of approval, Microsoft stamp of approval. So the investment, I guess, is a big part. The willingness to take on the additional risk up front, even in some ways that, maybe a market that's still developing, or sometimes they actually develop and create a market for themselves because they have that, willingness to invest. I mean, take a look at the acquisition strategy, invest in so many, acquisitions, 3+ dozen acquisitions a year, $4+ billion a year of acquisitions. So there's so much of that willingness to stay ahead of the market curve and demand that approach is what Accenture has taken with their partnerships and solidifying their trust day in and day out, and I think has helped them to build, bring them where they are.
I'd add two things to that. The acquisitions are important because they frequently acquire somebody who's bringing along or adding to a partnership. So they're acquiring an SAP boutique. So that's just reinforcing their commitment to SAP. The other thing, you and I have both been to the Accenture SAP Leadership Councils, forums. And I think that leadership commitment at the leadership level to that kind of partnership, I think, is key too. It's not as we've seen firsthand on the ground. It's not lip service.
No.
It really is the leadership is actually there from Accenture. Okay. Next question: do you see alliances evolving more towards multi-party arrangements, or do you think the tech space will continue to be mostly two-player partnerships? I mean, I strongly believe it's heading towards multi-party. I mean, I don't think there's any, and I think it's mostly because it's not entirely that the vendors themselves are looking for more complex relationships and alliance relationships and partnerships, that the clients themselves believe they're going to get more out of an ecosystem rather than just out of a partnership that comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's the buyers are really shaping terms and how things are changing, how that evolves. Buyers do appreciate to be challenged to start with when it comes to, they expect the vendors to come forth and cross-sell and upsell them services or portfolio offerings that may not be their core value proposition.
Right.
They expect that. But they also appreciate when there's a separation of labor. And when we talk to enterprise buyers, that's one thing they keep bringing consistently and putting vendors in groups, in tiers, because they know, looking at the enterprise, how it operates, you have a corporate strategy, you have the IT transformation strategy, and you have operations side of the house, right? So there's certain vendors that are known for doing that type of work.
Right.
And vendors need to step back and realize that they're better off partnering with the appropriate parties and go to market for what they're known for versus trying to sell and trying to become what they're not. Because we have multiple examples of vendors that tried and failed. Some of them have kind of shaken off and got better at doing things moving forward. But it's an important piece to think about, that multi-enterprise, multi-vendor support is coming really to the benefit of the buyer. But it's also how vendors, that's going to create a completely different ballgame for the vendors to think about organizing themselves around not just 2, but 3 or 4 partnerships, along the way, from a commercial construct standpoint, from a vendor management perspective, from resource staffing, all these pieces. It's easier said than done. Our job is on the easier side, just to say you should do it that way. But that's something that we also hear from the buyers as well. So it's not just us, our own.
Yeah. Excellent. So that actually that tees up the last question that we have here, and it is around this multi-party alliances, and it's, what do buyers say? Do they care? I think you started to answer that. Which is the most important part of the alliance relationship? Sales, tech people, leadership, customer relationship people. So who are the most, when we look at to rephrase this person's question, when we look at the broader ecosystem and we look at the individual vendors, which is what we do well, what are the roles that we think are most important for the making alliances work? Is it salespeople, tech people, leadership, customers? Of course, it's everybody, but.
I would add one more persona, which I don't think anyone has it right now. Is probably a chief accountability officer.
Chief Accountability Officer?
I don't think that exists right now.
Okay. All right.
But this is something, again, from the buyers research that we actually just published, yesterday, the latest iteration of the annual survey for digital transformation. Voice of the customer is very strong about how buyers expect and what they expect from the enterprise, from the vendors that they service, from third-party service providers. Accountability ranks up pretty high. And it's about how do you manage your partners, holding yourself accountable, trying to think about, that peer review and be as transparent as possible, obviously, in your relationship.
Right.
And you hold yourself accountable. Transparency, accountability are important factors. And if you can demonstrate it from a service provider standpoint, that you are not just looking out for yourself, but you're actually willing to work with your counterparts, that resonates with the buyers.
There's a number of companies we've been speaking to recently that everything you just said makes me think of like PwC's whole new equation, that new equation thing. They'll feel like Software One around transparency, like just being totally direct about what they do and don't do, which goes back to your point about not trying to be everything to everybody. So, I think, and it just opens up that whole mess of alliance relationships entirety, and that's what this whole webinar has been about, and it's something that we're increasingly being asked to understand better, to understand how it is that the smaller companies can partner with the larger companies, and really that's not as much about the smaller companies' positioning. It's more about understanding what is it that the Accentures look for in a partnership. What is it that a Deloitte or a Dell look for when they're partnering with a particular, and to get back to the startup question, honestly, that's part of it too. So excellent stuff. Thank you, Boz. Thank you, Haley, for helping us out with this. If you have any other questions, of course, you can always reach out to us directly. You have our information there, and we'll see you for the next webinar.